The Harbinger always went for the freaks. They were its favorite. He wanted ones that would fight back, and ones that wouldn't be afraid at first, or even better, ones that believed they could win. Those rare humans with bravado and confidence so great that they actually believed they could defeat it somehow. Those were always the most pleasurable to kill. It loved watching the life fade from their defiant eyes as it slowly ripped them to shreds, watching as the realization that they were in fact powerless dawned on them. For centuries, this ancient creature had hunted down humans, whether for pleasure, sport, or because it was compelled to by instinct. It thrived on the death of the human race. However, it had long since grown tired of the predictable frightened screams and wails of agony that often accompanied its various campaigns. As such, it had opted to change its prey demographic to the more interesting humans one might find among the masses. After all, Earth now had over 7 billion humans infesting its surface. Surely some of them would offer a more unique and exciting hunt than the thousands the Harbinger had culled before. That said, finding less predictable humans among millions of their more boring counterparts was like finding a needle in the haystack. Ever since the Harbinger had changed its modus operandi, it had become frustrated by the slower increase of its kill count. It had no idea which was worse, killing worthless, boring humans in droves, or spending weeks tracking down potentially interesting ones, sometimes only to find out that they just reacted as disappointingly as the rest. But then, the Harbinger found Adrian Bishop. At first, Adrian Bishop appeared to be yet another ordinary human with an ordinary life. The only thing about him that attracted the Harbinger's very selective attention was the fact that this man actually saw him. Normally, the Harbinger existed on a plane of existence above that of humans. Only when it wanted to reveal itself would they be able to witness its terrifying form. Yet one morning, as the Harbinger was prowling the streets of downtown Ottawa, a man stopped in his tracks and looked directly at it. The Harbinger, confused, looked behind itself, certain that the man had noticed something else and was just looking in its direction. Yet nothing noteworthy lingered there, while the man's gaze was pointed upward to meet the eyes of the 9-foot-tall monster. And then, Adrian Bishop did something completely unexpected. Not panic, or flee, or even show a hint of fear. He simply smiled. It was a knowing, mischievous kind of smirk. If the hideously malformed face of the Harbinger could have made a surprised expression, then it most certainly would have. As if that wasn't strange enough, the man then simply looked away and began walking again as if nothing had happened. The Harbinger stood looking all around for anything that might have caught the passerby's attention, but it seemed almost undeniable that the man had been looking directly at it. Needless to say, this warranted an investigation. So the Harbinger followed Adrian throughout his day. Unlike before, the man no longer paid it any attention, going about his daily business as usual. The Harbinger discovered that he worked at a local convenience store as a manager. From what it could tell, he was quite well liked by his employees and superiors, and had an almost painfully cheerful demeanor. The day passed by rather uneventful, and the Harbinger grew bored. By the time Adrian started to head home, it was starting to suspect that the earlier incident had all been some kind of unlikely coincidence, and that Adrian hadn't seen him after all. Still, the interdimensional monstrosity didn't have anything better to do at that moment, so decided to at least follow this human back to his house. As they arrived at the rather small flat, the Harbinger followed Adrian through a short hallway and into the living room. Adrian began taking off his coat while the Harbinger lingered in the hallway, glaring suspiciously at one particular locked door on the far end of the room. It felt something strange coming from that room, something unnatural. "You can quit hiding over there, you know," Adrian's voice rang out, almost catching the creature off guard. "I apologize for keeping you waiting, but I'm afraid it was necessary to keep up appearances. Don't want people thinking." Before the human was able to finish his sentence, the Harbinger was upon him with a long blade-like claw pressed against his throat and another hand clutching his head. Adrian didn't so much as flinch.
What is your true name?
The Harbinger demanded, its voice like dozens of voices speaking at once. It seemed impossible to it that this human could see it. In its lifetime it had come across humans who could sense it using somewhat of a sixth sense before, but never one who could actually lay eyes upon it while in a higher plane. Surely this was another dark being in disguise. "My name?" Adrian queried, the creature's firm grip on him not doing anything to deter his vaguely smug attitude. Adrian Bishop, human being extraordinaire." Growing frustrated, the Harbinger increased the strength of its grip, causing Adrian to wince. "Ow, ow! Easy there, you don't want to kill me, my friend."
And why would I not?
The Harbinger rasped.
No human should be able to see the beings of the higher plane. You lie!
"Sorry, but I beg to differ," Adrian replied. "I'm aware that you and your kind possess a keen sense for the supernatural, right? So I ask, is there anything remotely inhuman about my being?" As much as the Harbinger tried, the human was right. From what it could tell, the man currently held firmly in its clutches was nothing other than human. Were it any other sort of ephemeral demon, the Harbinger should have been able to tell right away.
How then?
The Harbinger insisted.
How has your science truly come this far?
Adrian chuckled, even as the Harbinger's claw continued pressing harder against his soft flesh. "No, of course not. I am as clueless as you are when it comes to the origin of my little gift, as it were. I've been able to see boogeymen like you since I was a child. In fact, I'm not even the only one who can. Though, I assure you, it comes as no surprise to me that you aren't aware of our existence. Perceptive humans like me are quite a rare find, even today, when there are many more than there used to be." The Harbinger was still uncertain of this human. However, it couldn't deny the evidence before it. Even now it was still concealed in a different layer of reality, yet it was conversing with Adrian as if it were on his level. The hideous features of its face contorted into what might have been interpreted as a look of disgust. The very idea of being unintentionally seen by a mere mortal was mortifying. Yet at the same time, it couldn't deny that Adrian Bishop appeared to be one of the most interesting humans it had come across in a very long time. Not once during his entire encounter had he even shown a hint of fear, as if he knew he wasn't going to die. While the Harbinger was extremely tempted to prove him wrong by skewering him right now, it instead opted to wait and see what he would do. Part of the thrill was watching them squirm, after all. The Harbinger released its grip on Adrian, prompting a brief sigh from the man, not of relief but of exasperation. "Ah, about time you came to your senses. You're an easily excitable one, aren't you, Harbinger?" He turned around, actually looking at the monstrosity for the first time since that morning. "And a handsome one, if I may say so."
Do not tempt me, mortal.
The Harbinger growled.
Give me one sufficient reason to keep you alive for even a second longer.
"Oh, I'll give you more than just one," Adrian said, that knowing smirk returning to his face. "See, I know exactly why you're here. I understand your way of thinking more than most. You came here to kill me because you thought I was interesting, no?" The Harbinger remained silent. "You thought I might put up a fight or try to resist you, make the hunt a little more interesting, right? Yes, I can see it in your eyes. We're kindred souls, you and I." The Harbinger scoffed, its bones cracking as it held its head up high.
Do not be so impudent as to think you are like me. You are but a mere insect compared to—
Yes, I know. That isn't how I meant it," Adrian interrupted, prompting an irritated growl from the monster before him. "I'm just saying, I'm tired of it too." The man turned around and began walking across the room to the locked door. "You know what I mean. The paranoia that begins to set in when you stalk them, the fear they feel when they realize there's no escape, the frightened wails and screams when you're flaying them with your knives, or, I guess, claws in your case. It's all so overdone." The Harbinger narrowed its bulbous eye at Adrian as he flipped a light switch. "If you come with me, I can give you exactly what you want, Harbinger." He turned around with a grin, halfway deranged and devious, plastered on his face. "A good hunt," Adrian stated. And with that, he began descending down into the stairway. The Harbinger wasn't sure what to do. It felt extraordinarily tempted to kill this human and watch that overconfident demeanor melt away in his final moments. Yet it was intrigued. More intrigued than it had been in a long, long time. Though he was human in body, Adrian Bishop appeared to be something entirely different in mind, something far closer to the Harbinger itself than any human it had met before. Ultimately, the choice was obvious. The monster followed after Adrian and began its descent down the stairs. "I'm glad you decided to make the right choice, my friend," Adrian chimed. The room at the bottom of the stairs was surprisingly spacious for a basement, with a floor and walls made of stone-cold concrete. It was what painted them that was of particular interest. Strange, archaic symbols littered the surface of the room, drawn almost anywhere and everywhere possible in what appeared to be dried blood. The only place where they weren't drawn was in the very center of the room, where another large circular symbol of similar nature had been carved into the floor. An assortment of cabinets was set throughout the room, some of which contained books and files, while others were packed full of glass containers, vials, and bottles of substances. A long table was set against the right wall, on which were set a variety of tools ranging from saws and hammers to strange little devices that seemed to be designed for torture. By far the most intriguing part of the room, however, was the two cages at the far end. Each contained a person, a male and a female, sitting in the corners of their respective cages, cowering at the sight of Adrian Bishop. "Welcome to my humble abode, Harbinger. Feel free to make yourself at home," Adrian mused. Taking a look around, the Harbinger recognized many of the symbols painted on the walls, though the one carved into the ground at the center was completely unknown, even to him. Regardless, he knew what this was.
So, you are one of the humans foolish enough to dabble in the black arts. I should have expected no less,
the Harbinger said. "Well, yes, though I like to think I do a little more than dabble," Adrian replied. He moved over to her swivel chair in the corner of the room and sat down. "I'm a bit of an aficionado when it comes to what people might refer to as sorcery. I've spent most of my life studying up, and I've even developed a few little charms and rituals of my own. It's not that hard if you know what you're doing, really." Turning the swivel chair around, he kicked the wall slightly, sending him rolling back. "I'm not really a wizard or anything. Rather, I think more akin to a psychic than anything else. The black arts is just a really grimdark term to describe the various combinations of actions, words, and symbols which allow the human mind to tap into the power of the place you like to call the higher plane. I can't claim to know how all of it works. That plane of existence is probably completely incomprehensible to us lowly humans. Frankly, I think a lot of the procedures you need to go through to cast curses and spells are ridiculously convoluted and cliché, but hey, what are you gonna do?" The Harbinger was growing impatient.
What is your point?
"Well, you're wondering why I can see and hear you, right? It's just that some humans have much greater latent psychic potential than others," Adrian explained, his chair coming to a stop as it swerved around to face the Harbinger. "And I happen to be one of them. We're called seers, a term I coined, by the way. We have a strong connection to the higher plane, which allows us to be able to perceive its residents. Among other things, in fact, not to brag, but out of all the seers I've met, I'm probably the most gifted. It allows me to perform incantations and rituals that most could probably never do." The Harbinger scoffed, turning its attention to the two cowering humans in cages. They were almost completely naked, wearing only ragged underwear, and the rest of their bodies were covered in bloody bandages. They had both had their hands cupped over their faces, as if doing so would hide them from their captor.
Are you sure you are not simply what humans refer to as a psychopath?
The Harbinger sneered. Adrian chuckled in amusement, following its line of sight to the two captives. "I don't know, probably, though I think I'm a tad more ambitious than the average psychopath, to be honest," he said. "As for these two, they aren't here to be killed. They're more like, my lab rats." The Harbinger observed the so-called lab rats for a moment longer. From what it could tell, they were utterly psychologically destroyed, as they did little more than rock back and forth while sitting huddled in the corners of their prisons.
I have not seen depravity such as this from your kind in many decades,
the Harbinger said, though for once it was more of a compliment than an insult. Its long, bony finger pointed in the direction of the cabinet filled with narcotics.
I imagine that is what those are for then.
Very perceptive of you, Adrian chimed, growing more enthusiastic. At first they were just a couple of toys to be played with and discarded, but I confess, I grew a little too attached to them. The two of them were rather resistant, after all. The woman managed to hold out for a whole week before pleading for it to stop, you know? That is quite rare, and when the man noticed I had started following him, he actually tried to stab me. Honestly, I admired their willpower so much that I couldn't let them go to waste, so I decided to try some of my experiments regarding true fear on them. You would be amazed what a combination of hallucinatory drugs, some simple fear induction incantations, and just a smidgen of physical torture can do.
Enough of your talk,
The Harbinger snapped.
I grow bored. Where is this hunt you promised me?
Oh, right. My apologies. I don't get a chance to talk about my hobbies very often, Adrian said, scratching the back of his head nonchalantly. He pushed his feet against the ground, sending the chair rolling back before colliding with the cage of the woman. Her whole body froze as she briefly glanced up at him, before she curled up into a ball. Adrian crossed his legs, staring intently at the Harbinger. Now then, let's get down to business. My proposition is simple enough. I'm offering to become your supplier. I take it you've been having trouble finding humans worthy to hunt, right? Well, worry no more. I know where you can find them. Plenty of them. Again, Adrian turned around and pushed against the bars of the cage, sending the chair rolling toward one of the cabinets. Using a hand to stop himself, he pried open one of the drawers, revealing a laptop. Ah, marvelous invention, the internet, he continued as he booted it up. It allows you to get in touch with people from around the globe. Not only that, but I think you'll find that people are much more interesting under the cover of anonymity, without society glaring over their shoulders with judgment. They're free to say whatever they want. It makes it an awful lot easier to identify the potential hunts. Adrian began tapping away the keyboard as he spoke. Over the years, I've spent a long time trying to find people who might be interesting, and I don't just mean resilient people. I mean people like me, people who've seen what I've seen, seers. It took quite some time considering how rare they are, combined with the heaps of fakes and charlatans out there. But I developed a way for seers to reliably identify one another, and I got us to band together. Now, I run an entire online community full of users who are seers. It's strictly invitation only, of course. Some are more psychically gifted than others, but they can all at least see monsters. Because of that, I can guarantee that none of them have lived a normal life, or could be defined as normal people. The Harbinger was speechless. If what Adrian was saying was true, it had just stumbled across the greatest opportunity in centuries. It was almost too good to be true, and because of that, the Harbinger wasn't about to believe him right away.
Surely you jest,
It replied.
as if that little device could be used to amass so many people.
Adrian sighed and shook his head. Come on, Harbinger, don't be an old geezer. You know as well as I do it's perfectly possible. It was through this website and the people in it that I first became aware of you. The Harbinger perked up at this.
Is that so?
Adrian nodded. Yes, it is. I was just logging on now so I could prove it to you. If I remember right, I was first informed about you by a user who actually observed you for a time while you were in New York. They watched you stalk a kid named, Adrian moved his finger across the touchpad and tapped it a few times. Here we go. It was a girl named Lucy Wilder, 16 years old, lived in Brooklyn, had a scar on one of her eyebrows. You killed her back in 2010? Ring any bells? The Harbinger thought for a moment before realizing it did remember killing a young girl with this scar on its eyebrows a few years ago.
That hunt was quite substandard,
It simply commented. It seriously doubted that Adrian could have found this out on his own. He must have been telling the truth. That's unfortunate. I do find that teenagers are some of the most easily frightened, aside from small children, of course, Adrian said, closing the laptop. So then, am I right in assuming you believe me now? The Harbinger was willing to believe that this claim of a seer network was true, but something was still off about the entire exchange.
You plan to sell out the people that you spent so long gathering. Why? Are they not your ilk?
Adrian was silent for a moment. simply looking at the Harbinger numbly before suddenly bursting out laughing. My ilk? You must be joking, he boomed, prompting more frightened shivers from the humans in the cages. Come along, Harbinger. Surely you must see by now I'm nothing like these humans. You think I feel some sort of attachment to these people? They're merely playthings to be toyed with. That's all. I gathered them for a very specific purpose, in fact, which is why I need your help eliminating them.
And what purpose would that be?
The Harbinger asked. Well, experimentation, of course, but not like you've seen with these people. I plan to conduct a whole new kind of experiment, for which I specifically need seers, Adrian explained. The problem is, none of the seers actually live nearby. They're dispersed throughout the world, and I can't get to them easily, even with the black arts on my side. But you can.
I will not capture them for you and bring them back.
The Harbinger growled.
I will not be your slave.
Come now, don't take me for a fool. I know that, Adrian replied. The experiment I want to perform actually involves a ritual. I don't necessarily need to be there to activate it, it's just that the mechanism requires a perfectly gifted individual as a sacrifice. All I need you to do is set the ritual up as per my instructions each time, and kill your victim in the ritual setting after you've had your fun, of course. The instructions will be different each time as I try out different variants of the ritual since it's custom-made. The Harbinger grew somewhat suspicious as it listened to Adrian's explanation.
What is this ritual you speak of?
Well, that's an interesting question. You see, it involves the combination of a series of ancient incantations passed down through my family for generations, combined with some basic trigger runes, a type 5 spell
What is its purpose?
The Harbinger impatiently interrupted. Right, sorry, rambling. Basically, I want to reanimate the dead. The Harbinger let out a chuckle at this.
Ha! You humans never cease to amuse me. Your televisions have lied to you. The undead do not exist. It is impossible to reanimate a corpse after its soul is gone.
Ah, I know, but I don't intend to let the soul leave its body, Adrian excitedly proclaimed. Without going into too much detail, the idea is to trap the soul inside the dead body using the brain's psychic energy. The high psychic potential of seer should make it possible to contain the soul even after death, since the brain doesn't immediately cease functioning after death. Then the incantation you recite should stir the trapped soul, causing it to reanimate the body. In theory. The Harbinger was sure that this foolish theory was nonsense, but the man seemed completely confident in his abilities, and it was none of the creature's business whether the ritual succeeded or failed. All that mattered to him were the hunts which were being promised. It seems like a fair exchange, doesn't it? Adrian said, looking up at the Harbinger. All you have to do is a bit of handiwork after your hunt is finished. You can spend as much time psychologically decimating the person as you like, but once the time comes to finish them off, I simply ask that you kill them according to my instructions. And believe me, the hunts will be worth your while. The Harbinger stared down at the seated man. The offer was too tempting to resist. At this point, there was no way it could refuse. As much as it desired to kill Adrian, it would be foolish not to take advantage of his offer first. Then, after Adrian ran out of victims to supply, his number would be up, and the Harbinger would claim his ultimate reward, that smug grin of his. The Harbinger made a quick, jerky movement with his head that resembled a nod.
We are in agreement, Adrian Bishop.
And so, the partnership between monster and man began. I made the deal. Adrian entered the text before sending it to the private chat room. Oh God, Thomas replied. Roland was next to comment. Video footage? He asked. Adrian responded. I've emailed it to all of you.
Holy shit, I'm so excited.
Gale typed enthusiastic. Excited? I'm fucking terrified. Fear of death will do that to you, my friend, Adrian replied. Roland's anticipation was boiling. Finally, our lives will completely turn around. I thought I'd be excited when this happened, or terrified, but I'm not really sure what to feel. I understand, Roland. I feel the same way, Adrian reassured him. But if all goes according to plan, it won't be long. As you know, it won't happen right away. I'm having the Harbinger deal with some bottom feeders before I send him on you. This serves the dual purpose of gaining the Harbinger's trust and performing some last-minute tests with the ritual, he typed. Thomas's anxiety was evident in his messages. Those test subjects of yours won't rise up for long, right? Of course. I've mixed in limitation runes with the symbolic formula to make sure that the subject will die after a few seconds. As long as they rise up at all, we'll know it was a success. Then I simply remove the limiters when our time comes, and voila! I know it's a little late to be saying this, but are you sure this will work? Roland interjected. I mean, will it really believe that bullshit about making zombies? Adrian was confident and replied with haste. It does not care what my goal is with these rituals, as long as it gets an entertaining hunt. You see, creatures such as the Harbinger may seem devilish and cunning on the surface, but really they are quite simple-minded. Most of their prowess as hunters comes from their instinct rather than their strategic thinking. He lectured on. That, combined with its borderline god complex, makes it so that it would never even entertain the possibility of being outsmarted by a lowly human. I could go on about the psychology of such creatures if you wish. He sent with a sliver of pride. No! Thomas protested quickly on his keyboard. Yeah, no offense, Adrian, but please spare us another one of your lectures, Gale texted. An underlying tone of annoyance danced on the message. Sorry, I just thought it might make Roland feel better, Adrian commented apologetically. Just make sure you have your axe ready, Roland. If the Harbinger gets bored with hunting you, the whole plan could fall apart. You are all the most powerful seers I have come to know these years. I trust that won't be too much of an issue, correct? Of course not, Thomas replied. Fuck yeah, Gale stated. Yes, I suppose so, Roland texted. Excellent, Adrian texted with delight. With your cooperation, it won't be long before we all ascend. The following months were filled with bloodshed. Though it had initially been skeptical, the Harbinger soon began to realize that Adrian's claims were entirely true. Its first victims were what its benefactor described as monster hunters. Those who use the black arts to target monsters and either kill or seal them away. Personally, I find those people to be fools, Adrian had complained. They believe they're righteous warriors of justice, saving the world from one evil monster at a time, or some nonsense. Huh! In reality, they're little more than pest control. They only have enough power to put down the most inferior and feeble-minded of beings, and barely enough to seal away some of those on higher level. None of them could ever hope to defeat a monster such as yourself, but believe me, they will try. Many of them have died doing so. Each of the hunters provided more entertainment than the Harbinger had in years. Most operated on their own, but some of those who were in close proximity to one another actually banded together to engage in their little hobby. Some of them were intimidated when faced with the challenge that was the Harbinger, but having been approached by creatures of the unknown many times before, they did their best to use their weak incantations and rituals to get rid of it. Some of the less experienced ones, who couldn't have known how much of a threat the Harbinger really was, even went as far as to taunt and threaten the Harbinger. It was all quite amusing watching the insects and their false sense of grandeur fall apart as the Harbinger haunted them day and night. To perform the rituals, the Harbinger would wait until night to take its victim to a deserted building, such as an abandoned warehouse. Adrian requested that a video camera be set up so that he could observe, which was no easy task for the beast and its long clawed hands. All of the rituals were highly complex, requiring overly specific procedures to perform. The Harbinger needed to carve a very specific series of symbols and runes into the walls of the room in a very specific order. What was even more convoluted were the necessary actions. During one ritual, the Harbinger was required to move 2 steps back, stab the victim in both of their legs, move 2 steps forward, scratch their eyes out, then it would wait. Then it would wait for 5 seconds before biting the victim's nose off and leading them to bleed out. Considering how much these procedures caused the victim suffering, the Harbinger had no issues performing them, and in fact, he enjoyed it. Though, one strange commonality that all of the rituals had was the final procedure, during which the Harbinger would be required to carve a deep circle around itself and allow the victim's blood to pool into it. Then it would speak the same incantation 13 times before the ritual would end, and it would wait. But never once did the victim come back to life. The Harbinger brought this up with Adrian one day after its 10th kill.
Your primitive little rituals do not appear to be succeeding. Do you still truly believe that the dead can be brought back to life?
Theoretically, everything checks out, Adrian said, frowning as he looked over one of his diagrams of a strange pentagram-like symbol. Honestly, I don't know why this is happening. Maybe the seer's mental energy just isn't powerful enough. The Harbinger was well aware that the problem was probably more fundamental than that. It did not know a great deal about the Black Arts after all. It was already a being with powerful connection to the higher plane and thus had no need for them. But over the centuries it had managed to pick up a few of the basics of sorcery, and after remembering some of that trivial knowledge, it realized that there were a few faults in the procedure that Adrian had been performing. The way he was arranging the symbols and runes, they were geared to perform the basic function of taking energy away, which was probably just causing the victim's psychic power to be sapped away before it could be used to trap the soul. Although it was somewhat confused by the contradictory nature of Adrian's ritual, it did not say anything. It realized that the reason Adrian had made a deal with it was in order to test this ritual, which meant that as long as the ritual needed to be performed, the arrangement would continue. Thus, it resolved to follow Adrian to continue his foolish escapade until either he figured the problem out on his own, or the Harbinger grew tired of his hunts. Ideally, he wouldn't have figured it out until the Harbinger wanted him to, at which point his ritual would be a success, and his ego would be at an all-time high. That would be a perfect time to bring about his ultimate downfall. Satisfied with its little scheme, the Harbinger continued to humor the man.
Is there no way to gauge a seer's mental capacity?
Yes, it should be possible to judge how strong someone's psychic connection is based on the level of the incantations they can perform, Adrian replied. But that doesn't mean I know everyone's psychic potential. I can't force everyone on my website to undergo a test. That said, the ones I've been sending you after are, to my knowledge, relatively weak. I've been saving the bigger fish for later, since I'm sure neither of us wants to waste those too early on. The Harbinger perked up at this. It watched Adrian roll from one side of the room to the other in his swivel chair as he picked up another diagram.
And why would you assume that of me? It makes no difference to me what my victim's psychic potential is.
Oh, but it does, Harby. Adrian was quick to respond, putting down his diagram and looking up at the being. Mind if I call you Harby? The Harbinger took a long step forward, growling as it glared down at him.
Do not tempt me, mortal.
Adrian chuckled. What is that, your catchphrase or something? He mused. As much as the Harbinger wanted to skewer one of his legs on the spot, it restrained itself. The sense of safety the man was beginning to feel around it would only serve to make his death all the more delicious. Anyway, do you remember the day we met when you mentioned that I might be a psychopath? I did a little research on the subject, and I discovered that I actually fit the bill quite nicely. But for that matter, so do a few of my friends. He picked up a Rubik's Cube and began to fiddle with it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the more powerful seers were all quite similar in disposition to me. Those I know to be on a higher spectrum are more selfish, vain, and uncaring, while very skilled at acting like they aren't. Few of them even admitted to being psychopaths or sociopaths when I told them I was the same. To simplify, the more powerful one's connection is to the higher plane, the more of a monster they are. He chuckled again, and haphazardly threw the cube over his shoulder. Quite fitting, wouldn't you say?
Interesting,
the Harbinger simply replied.
And would that not make you the king of the human monsters then, Bishop?
With that knowing grin, Adrian turned his swivel chair to face it. I suppose it must. A few weeks later, the Harbinger wiped out most of the remaining monster hunters. By the end of the 5-month killing spree, however, it had been feeling increasingly drained of energy. It wasn't sure if it was simply out of shape, or if the incantations and curses the hunters used had actually had some effect. Either way, it didn't inform Adrian of this development. It was not about to show weakness in front of a lowly human. That morning, as it entered the man's basement to receive its next assignment, it found no one. Even the 2 caged humans were now gone, leaving only bloodstains where they had once cowered. As it prepared to wait for Adrian's arrival, the Harbinger was suddenly overcome with a strong feeling of uneasiness. It knew this was its instincts alerting it to something supernatural, but it was more than just the arcane images the room was plastered with. It felt familiar, in fact. It began to look around the dark room for the source of the disturbance, and its eyes came to rest upon the symbol carved into the floor in the center. It hadn't noticed before, but that large circular image appeared to be faintly glowing. What are you doing sulking in the dark down here, Harby? Adrian's voice rang out from the top of the staircase as he flicked on a light switch. The Harbinger didn't reply as it watched him come down the stairs. "I suppose you finished off Turner then," he said, taking a sip from a coffee. "Good. I believe this would be a good time to start aiming a bit higher, wouldn't you say?"
You speak of the more gifted seers?
The Harbinger asked. Adrian set down his cup and moved over to his swivel chair, plopping down into it as always. "Indeed, but this time don't be surprised if they actually are aware of your existence," he replied, retrieving a laptop from his table. "The monster hunters were very vocal about their experiences. I've done my best to restrict information about you, but word of mouth spread swiftly." The creature scoffed.
Their struggles only make my hunt sweeter. Let them come.
"That's the spirit. Now, your next target is someone I'm quite familiar with. In fact, he is one of the greatest seers I've ever met." He began typing away at his computer once again. "His name is Roland Whitaker. Unlike your previous targets, this man doesn't actually have an address. He's somewhat of a nomad. He has a lot of money, so he travels around, never staying in one place for too long."
So you do not know his whereabouts?
The Harbinger asked. "Presently, he's in Liverpool, England. Seems he's staying in a hotel called the Nadler. But believe me, he's a slippery fox. He's eluded many a hunter before, both human and inhuman." The Harbinger eyed the man.
I thought you would be wise enough not to question my skills by now, human.
Adrian shrugged. "Fair enough. I know your kind has their way when it comes to tracking people. Just rest assured, this hunt will probably take longer than any of your others." As it turned around to leave, the Harbinger took one last look at the symbol in the center of the floor. It had stopped glowing, but the monster still felt uncomfortable just looking at it.
Bishop,
It called.
I have remarked that you have me draw this symbol during each ritual. What is that accursed thing's purpose?
Adrian hummed, looking away from his computer screen and down at the symbol. "Oh, that? It's just a Type 7 spell circle designed to enhance the incantation. That's why you put it around you. That one is from a failed experiment before I contracted you. I tried to perform the ritual on a regular person and failed, that's all." The Harbinger made an approximation of a frown with its vertical mouth. Although the explanation seemed somewhat dubious, it didn't care enough to inquire any further, and soon went on its way. Adrian let out a heavy sigh as soon as his partner was gone. "Glad that's over for now," he said. "Can't believe 5 months have already passed." "Wow!" "Well, at least the fake footage is finally finished." He trailed off as he looked over to the cages, remembering that they were now empty. "Oh, right. And so my monologues are reduced to mere soliloquies. Oh, the shame," he mused. Still no response. Perhaps I'll get a new pet after all. Adrian opened his laptop and sent a private message to Roland. "Gosh, Roland, you haven't a clue about how stressful it can be keeping up a cool front with that monster around. Sometimes it looks like it's about ready to slice me in half. Isn't that the idea, lol?" "Well, I suppose so, but I come last, remember. Anyway, I've sent him after you. Not to worry, the tests were a complete success. If everything goes smoothly, you will officially be the first of us to ascend. Isn't it exciting?" "Somewhat. I'm a bit number than I thought I'd be. In any case, footage?" "Already sent. As you can see, the experiments went swimmingly." Hello? So that's what Ascension looks like. Not what I expected, and why does the camera cut out at the end? Well, it's a powerful process. I mean, a measly video camera can only pick up so much. In fact, I had to buy a new camera each time because they kept getting fried. A lot of footage was destroyed too. What a waste. I can't say I fully understand it. We're dealing with a higher plane here after all. But it seems the transformation emits some kind of energy wave that fries all nearby electronics. I see. When should I expect to see the Harbinger here? A day or two, I suspect, but be prepared at all times. Oh, not to worry, I am. 2 months. For over 2 months, the Harbinger chased Roland Whitaker around the globe. It remembered the first trap that tricky weasel had laid for it. In room 206 of the Nadler, several otherworldly beasts awaited. The place was covered in spell circles, presumably designed to attract the demons, which immediately attacked. Enraged by the audacious and cowardly tactic, the Harbinger dispatched them all, going so far as to use one of the wolf-like things as a weapon to beat the other two to death. The spell circles Whitaker left made it easier to track him, since the trail of energy left by their caster could be followed, much like how a bloodhound follows a scent. However, at each of the new locations, the Harbinger thought he might find his victim. Another trap laid waiting. Sometimes they were similar in nature to the first, and other times they were even more drastic. At one point, Whitaker must have realized the spell circle made him easy to track, so he set explosives to blow up an entire motel while the Harbinger was inside. Of course, all this did was kill a few humans, but it was quite an amusing sight to behold. In fact, many of Roland's traps involved sacrificing the lives of his fellow humans, which the Harbinger found to be one of the most entertaining parts of the hunt. For once, it felt as if he was chasing down a fellow monster, albeit a greatly inferior one. By far, the most entertaining trap he had laid out was the final one, in which he finally revealed himself and confronted the Harbinger head-on. It took place inside the gymnasium of a small elementary school in some backwater German town. Roland stood on one end of the gymnasium, the Harbinger on the other, and the entire school's student body stood between them, crying in fear and horror as their teachers lay dead around them. "You should be thankful, monster," Roland proclaimed. "I've done you the favor of guiding you to this little wonderful buffet here." The man held up a small device as he stared at the monster. He was a man of a very little expression, with a stoic demeanor and confident posture. "But I'm not really a nice man, as you can probably tell. Here in my hand I have a trigger that will detonate an explosive. Of course, I'm not expecting that this will kill you. You've proven your endurance more than enough. The point is, it will kill these children. So I ask you, what would provide you more pleasure, killing little old me, or these wonderfully terrified children?" The Harbinger chuckled. Its chuckle erupted into a laugh, one so loud that even the confused children could hear it in the back of their little minds. This was perfect. Looking in his eyes, it could tell that the man thought he knew how to think like a monster. He thought the Harbinger thought like him. It was absolutely hysterical. The Harbinger didn't stop laughing as it dashed forward, reaching Roland in little more than the blink of an eye. Before he could react, it sliced its claws through the man's tender flesh, ripping his arm right off. Roland screamed almost as loudly as the children, who were apparently smart enough to see their chance and begin running for the exit. But it didn't care about them. The Harbinger made a twisted attempt at a smile as it dug its claws into the man's shoulder and began dragging him away. The following torture lasted another 2 weeks. The Harbinger wasn't sure if Whitaker was an extremely resilient man, or if he simply lacked emotion. Either way, it took a very long time and a variant of different tactics to finally get him to crack. While the wait annoyed the Harbinger, the satisfaction of finally seeing Roland Whitaker burst into tears after having to sit in a dark room with only the sound of dripping water was enough to make it all worth it. And so came the time for the ritual. The Harbinger dragged a shivering, near-dead Roland into the center of a room in some abandoned factory. This time, Adrian had requested a very large room and a much greater variety of symbols. But as it was setting everything up, it noted that Adrian still hadn't corrected that fundamental mistake in the ritual symbolic code. It would only result in another failure. It was just about to start setting up the camera when Roland whimpered, What is this?"
That is none of your concern.
No, this is..." He stuttered, letting out a few coughs as tears formed in his eyes. He kept trying to look around the room, struggling to move himself with the 2 bandaged stumps that were once his arms. No, oh God, no. This isn't how it's supposed to go," he mumbled, letting out another few coughs. "This isn't how it's supposed to be set up. It's wrong. No, this can't be happening." The Harbinger perked up. It seemed that the man had caught on to the fault in Adrian's ritual. It made sense. He was also well versed in the black arts after all. But the Harbinger couldn't allow its benefactor to hear this, so it stopped setting up the camera and moved towards the now hysterical Roland. "No, I don't want to die. I want it to be like..." He was cut off all too abruptly as the Harbinger suddenly reached 2 large fingers into his mouth and proceeded to rip out his tongue. Now with Roland screaming, the Harbinger went back to setting up the camera, placing the tongue somewhere away from the ritual. The rest of the procedure went smoothly. The Harbinger had grown quite accustomed to the rituals by now, so it had no trouble performing the designated actions, which weren't too different from the usual. It was only after the ritual ended that things became problematic. As it was about to chop off Roland's body to As it was about to chop up Roland's body to dispose of it, the Harbinger was suddenly hit with a dizzy spell. Its visions blurred, and its senses began to numb as it struggled to stay standing. Ultimately, its knees buckled and it fell to the ground, trying to regain its bearings. There it stayed for several minutes, groaning as it tried to get its mind in order. It never experienced anything like this, and had no idea what to do. Eventually, its eyesight did return, and it stood up, more confused than it had ever been. Absent-mindedly, it continued going about its duty, slicing through the dead flesh before him with reckless abandon, allowing blood to splatter all over. Its mind was set on trying to figure out what had caused it to falter so suddenly. Later that evening, after it had dropped the remains in some nearby lake, the Harbinger decided to take a walk. The sun had set, leaving only streetlights to illuminate the dark sidewalk. As it walked, it pondered. Or at least it tried to, but it was tired. It couldn't think properly. Creatures as powerful as it didn't need to rest, so it didn't understand why its mind was so blank all of a sudden. Perhaps, it reasoned, this would simply stop after a while. Its thoughts were interrupted as a deafening scream pierced the air. "Oh my god! What is that thing? Fucking run!" Looking ahead, it noticed several teenagers running in the opposite direction, screaming in terror. They had seen the Harbinger.
Impossible,
it muttered, looking down at its hands in astonishment. It had not consciously chosen to show itself. Normally, it should still be concealed under the veil of the higher plane. Why then had those kids been able to see it without it allowing them to? It highly doubted they were all seers. There was no way. The Harbinger lunged forward, its long strides allowing it to catch up to the group in mere seconds. A boy looked behind him and screamed out in horror as the Harbinger's claws came down, piercing its skull and putting an end to its wailing. A girl shouted, "Terry!" before tripping and falling. The Harbinger didn't even look at her as it crushed her skull underfoot and jumped onto the third boy. Instead of immediately killing him, it simply observed him for a moment. He was absolutely hysterical, of course, and was struggling to get free from underneath the beast, but he didn't appear to be looking directly at it. It seemed that it was finally concealed again, like it ought to be. Finally, at least somewhat relieved, the Harbinger simply sliced his neck and rose up. The Harbinger tried to think of what to do with the bodies, but it found that it couldn't. The Harbinger tried to think of what to do with the bodies, but it found that it couldn't. It didn't really feel like thinking about such trivial things now. All that mattered was returning to Adrian and receiving his next assignment. The sound of a text emanated from Adrian's laptop. He opened it and viewed Gale's message. "Jesus Christ, Roland's little game with the Harbinger is all over the news." Thomas responded, "I really hope the Harbinger takes care of him soon." "Yeah, the sooner he ascends the better. Then again, what if it only gets worse when he does? We have no idea what exactly happens after the ritual succeeds, right? What if he gets some weird explosion powers or something? That'd be a real pain in the ass." "Hey, Adrian, you there?" "I am." "Dear, I did not expect him to be so brazen. What a pyromaniac. Well, at least it's not like it affects us, right?" "Indeed. The death toll of this hunt was high, but it isn't like we're implicated in any way. Which reminds me, he's dead." "What?" "What?" "Adrian, what the fuck are you talking about? I thought you said this ritual was a success." "It was, or it should have been. It seems that idiotic monster got carried away and killed him during torture. In part, it was also Roland's fault for doing such a good job at provoking it by resisting." "Oh Jesus, oh boy. Calm down, Gale." "Shit. What if it does the same to us? This isn't how you said it would be, Adrian." "Relax, the plan is still proceeding smoothly. It's only a minor hiccup." "Minor hiccup?" "As long as neither of you repeat the mistake, it should be fine. You're both different from him anyway." Yeah, you're right. "I still don't know about this. I'm pulling my claim to second place." "Oh, real fucking smooth. Fine then, since you're too much of a pussy, I'll go next." "It seems the Harbinger has returned. I'll be back."
Bishop!
"Yes, dear." The Harbinger descended the stairs to the basement, its arms hanging limply at its sides.
Give me my next victim!
It ordered. Adrian looked up from his laptop monitor with a frown. "What, already? I thought we could have a little chat.
Enough with your chattering, human,
The monster bellowed.
My next meal, now!
Alright, Adrian said. He rolled over to her table and picked up a piece of paper. Gail Palmer lives in San Antonio, Texas. Here's his address and the instructions for the ritual. The Harbinger snatched the paper up, but as it was about to leave, it heard a loud clang come from one of the cages. It turned to see a young girl, about 10 years old, trapped in one of the cages. She didn't make a sound, but her mouth was open as if she was trying to scream, but her eyes were locked on the Harbinger. Adrian looked from the girl to the monster, then back to the girl. You like her? She's my new pet. I already damaged her vocal cords, so she can't scream, he explained. But why is it she can see you? Last I checked, she was no seer. The Harbinger growled, both at the little girl and the man, causing the former to curl up into a ball. It then looked at Adrian.
Mind your own business.
With that, it stormed out of the room. Adrian watched it go with a sly smile on his face. Well, looks like the plan is coming along better than I expected, he said, spinning around in his swivel chair. Won't be long before the Harbinger is just a big, scary old fish out of the interdimensional water. I can't wait to see how many people react. He stopped himself facing the girl. Don't you think so, Adriana? When the girl didn't reply, he looked down to his laptop. Looks like I won't have any need for Thomas anymore, though. After Gail's finished, that ought to do it. Adrian typed his message into the box. Here I am. How'd it go? Quite well. The Harbinger will be coming after you shortly. Phew. Great. Time to get ready. Remind me again what your strategy is? Well, I'm not gonna blow up building if that's what you mean. My strategy's short and sweet. Should take a few days max, if Harbinger reacts the way I want it to. If it doesn't, it'll probably take even less than that. 2 days, maybe? That's a relief to hear. Roland took so long, I thought I would die of boredom. So, you're sure it will work this time? Positive. I forgave the Harbinger for his previous transgression, and he is still none the wiser to our plan, so everything should go smoothly. That's what you always say. Anyway, I have to go. Need to tend to Adriana. Who? Bye. The Harbinger let out a sigh. It was beginning to feel a bit more at ease. For some reason, being in Adrian's basement had set it on edge like it hadn't been in a long time. Although it still felt weary, the monster at least had a new hunt to focus on. In the end, that was all that mattered. Soon enough, it located the apartment number of Gail Palmer. The Harbinger was about to phase through the door when all of a sudden it opened up. Hey! The man on the other side cheerfully chirped. He was tall and quite handsome, with short black hair. He wore a fine tailored suit, as if he were ready to go out for some occasion. Come in, I've been expecting you, he said, as he motioned for the beast to enter. Needless to say, this was quite a surprise, though the Harbinger had come to expect no less from the people Adrian supplied it with. He was probably setting some sort of trap, so the Harbinger decided it would be best to go along with his little game and see what he had planned. Gale closed the door behind the Harbinger. Make yourself at home, Harbinger, he said, motioning toward one of the 2 couches stationed on either side of a small table in the center of the room. His apartment was surprisingly decorative and homely for one so small, and indeed, had the Harbinger been a human, he most certainly would have taken his offer to sit down.
What game are you playing, human?
The Harbinger growled in an attempt to intimidate him. Of course, he was completely unfazed. Why, I'm just being nice to a guest. Now, what's your poison? Tea or coffee? Sorry, but I don't do alcohol. The Harbinger was silent for a moment.
Coffee.
Coffee it is, chimed the man as he moved into the kitchen nearby. Good choice. I'm more of a coffee guy myself. It felt strange for the Harbinger to sit down on a couch. It never sat down on a couch before. In fact, it rarely ever sat down to begin with. But for the sake of playing along with this charade, it did so. A minute later, Gale returned with 2 cups of steaming coffee. Careful, it's hot, he said. Sitting down on the couch opposite to the creature, he looked at the Harbinger directly in the eyes. So then, tell me something about yourself, Harbinger. I'd love to know. The Harbinger paused, glaring back at him.
I am here to kill you.
Gale stifled a laugh. Oh, Harbinger, I know that already. What I'm asking is to tell me something about yourself, your personalities. Do you have any hobbies, interests? The Harbinger, still confused at the strange nature of this conversation, did not respond. Instead it asked,
How do you know of my existence? Did your computer compatriots inform you?
Hey now, I understand you're not human, but it's a bit rude to leave a question unanswered, Gale chided. Both the human and the monster sat in silence for a few moments longer. It seemed neither were intent on answering the other's questions. In the end, the Harbinger was the one to give in.
I enjoy killing,
it said. It felt disgusted that it was playing the human, as well as being bossed around by one. But as degrading as this was, it reminded itself that this would be all worth it in the end. Wow! What a coincidence! So do I, Gale proclaimed, taking a sip from his coffee. I don't like killing myself, though. That's a bit messy. I just get my friends to do it for me.
You speak of your computer compatriots?
The Harbinger inquired. Oh heavens, no. I'm not talking about my other friends. In fact, they're here right now. Come out and say hi, everyone. At that moment, the door to the bedroom opened up and several small creatures came running out. The little monsters came in different shapes and sizes, though all were clearly animalistic. Some looked like deformed canines, while others looked like strange humanoid squids. There must have been at least a dozen of them. As soon as they began running out, the Harbinger sprang into action, preparing to attack them. No, stop! They don't mean you any harm, Harbinger, Gale exclaimed as one of the strange canines jumped onto his lap. They were behaving more like simple household pets than monsters, running around and sniffing things, never even damaging anything. The Harbinger noted that Gale's bedroom was filled to the brim with black art symbols, and the pieces clicked in his mind.
So, you have tamed these beasts?
It said.
I must admit, for a human, that is impressive.
Gale seemed to beam with pride. Why, thank you, the Harbinger scoffed, brushing a small troll-like creature away with its legs.
So then, you wish to tame me as well? Is that your goal?
Gale frowned. What? Well, of course not. You're my guest. The Harbinger sighed, sitting down. It knew it wouldn't be able to enjoy this ludicrous act much longer. In all honesty, I just wanted to have a talk with you. I thought perhaps if we got to know each other, we could avoid this whole, killing me thing, Gale went on. Does that sound fair to you? The Harbinger simply nodded, glad that a chance to create a dread finally presented itself. It would use this conversation to lead Gale into thinking that it would let him free, and then, when it was about to leave, it would dash all his hopes. And so the two continued talking until the sun set. The Harbinger did its best to act somewhat friendly and human, despite the sick feeling that resulted from doing so. Gale was quite the talker, however. He just wouldn't stop, in a way that was the best for the Harbinger, as listening was far easier than talking. He pretended to be sympathetic and take everything in, only responding when he was asked a question. Ultimately, it was a pathetic excuse for a hunt, but it was actually somewhat relaxing, in the sense that it didn't need to do much, and it wasn't hardly a waste of time. When the conversation ended, the Harbinger knocked Gale out and took him away to begin the torture. Listening to the voice that had babbled incessantly for hours scream at the top of its lungs was almost euphoric for the Harbinger. As unorthodox as the whole thing was, it was still amusing. By the time the man was ready for the ritual, the Harbinger was getting tired again. It wasn't in the mood to think of a place to perform the ritual anywhere, so it opted to just use the man's apartment. But as it had almost finished drawing the necessary symbols on every available surface, it noticed Gale stir. Harbinger, are you there? The Harbinger turned around, surprised he was still conscious. Unlike the previous victim, it decided to burn him rather than pierce and cut, since this was a shorter hunt anyway. Most of his hair was gone, and his eyes were struggling to stay open as he groaned from the second and third degree burns. Harbinger, could you switch those symbols around? They're wrong. The Harbinger followed his line of sight to a few of the symbols. They were not the ones that the Harbinger knew were wrong. Oh, and those ones there. His head slowly turned, and he looked at some more of the symbols. He kept doing this for almost all of the symbols that had been drawn as the Harbinger continued to follow the instructions he'd been given. Soon, the ritual was ready, leaving only the procedure. The Harbinger did what had been told, dragging him by what little hair he had left around the room 5 times. During that time, he wouldn't stop mumbling something. Should have known. Should have known. The Harbinger put him back down in front of Adrian's strange symbol and stood in it. His crusty eyes lifted, and he noticed the symbol for the first time. His eyes widened. Adrian, I should have known. This immediately caught the Harbinger's attention, but it couldn't stop to wax now, lest the ritual be ruined. It simply began repeating the incantation as usual. Meanwhile, Gale let out a hoarse chuckle. Oh my god. You have no idea what you're saying, do you? He said. You're basically giving him your power. His sentence was cut short as the Harbinger sliced his throat, letting his body fall to the floor. After the blood began to pool into the carved symbol, it repeated the incantations another 6 times and waited. As usual, nothing happened. The Harbinger was about to call it a day, when suddenly a jolt of pain ran through its body. It roared out in agony as it fell to the floor, clutching its head. It felt weak, weaker than it had ever before. It struggled to get up, but quickly lost its balance and fell again, this time actually impacting the floor and making a sound. This just made it more confused. It shouldn't have been able to do that! It was on the higher plane, but the more it tried to figure out what was going on, the more exhausted it felt, and the more its head hurt. Then there was a knock on the door. Gale, are you alright? Came a voice. Instinctively, the Harbinger crawled across the floor over to the door. It was human. Humans needed to be killed. That was all it could think about. Realizing it could no longer phase through the door for some reason, the Harbinger clumsily clutched the doorknob and flung it open. The man on the other side was about to scream, but he never got the chance as the claw reached out and went into his open mouth. Then, through the back of his head, the Harbinger retracted its claw and set about ripping the human apart. For some reason, it no longer cared about hunts or amusement. It was as if all of it had been stolen away, leaving only its bare and monstrous instincts. It just wanted to kill. That's when it remembered. Adrian Bishop, the one who had begun all of this. Who better to kill than him? I can't believe it. I can't believe we all fell for your little trap. We should have known. I should have known. Gale is dead. The Harbinger is on a motherfucking rampage. For fuck's sake, it's killed 15 people, and it's on the news. I'm dead. Oh god, fuck, I'm so dead. And it was all a waste, too. What a fucking life. It was all a lie, wasn't it? I bet it was. Should have known not to trust a fellow goddamn psycho. Ascension was a load of bullshit, wasn't it? Getting into the higher plane was impossible all along. You just wanted to kill us for your own sick amusement. Maybe you just wanted to be the only one to ascend. Is that it? Thomas, calm down. Got nothing to say for yourself? Fucking figured? You're wrong. Oh, don't give me that. You think it's obvious now? We spent months working on that ritual. It was theoretically perfect. It shouldn't have failed. The only reason it did is because you fucked it up on purpose. Theoretically. Listen to me. It never would have worked, not without a great amount of energy, an amount far greater than anything we could have extracted from any of ourselves. Why did you think I needed the Harbinger to be the one to do it, instead of one of you, or someone else? I was never performing the Ascension ritual in the first place. The ritual that I did perform on Gale and Roland, however, did indeed require a monster to be the caster, because the target was never Gale or Roland to begin with. Their psychic energy was only to be used as a conduit. I see. So then, I suppose I'm next. Whatever. There isn't anything I can do to stop it. Actually, I'm next. It seems I was a little too cautious in my calculations. I only needed 2 powerful seers to complete the process alongside those bottom feeders I used. The Type 7 glowing behind me is proof enough of that. You fucking piece of shit! Oh, it sounds like the final sacrifice has arrived. Don't worry though, after I'm finished here, I'll be sure to pay you a visit. The door to the basement was ripped right off of its hinges as Adrian's guest of honor made its way down the steps. The light switch didn't need to be flicked, for the room was filled with the bright light of the spell circle. In the middle, sitting comfortably on his swizzle chair, sat the man himself. Welcome back, Harbinger. Had a nice night out. The Harbinger charged, teeth and claws bared like a wild animal as it ran to claim its prize, but it never made it past the circle. The bright light blinded the beast, and a feeling many times stronger than the uneasiness it had felt heretofore overcame it. It was a feeling that it was unfamiliar with, but the power radiating from the circle it knew all too well. "I'm glad to see you're excited. As am I. I've been waiting for this day for many, many years, you know." Growling, the Harbinger tried to overcome the feeling, but to no avail. It could not bring itself to enter the circle, no matter how strong its bloodlust. Anyway, I suppose it's time for my monologue now. I suppose you, in all your simple-minded rage, couldn't understand, but I feel obligated to explain, even if it's to the empty shell of your former self. Adrian cleared his throat and smiled as he continued. "All of that you that has suddenly disappeared is actually here, if you didn't know." He extended his arms, motioning to the circle around him. "The rituals I was having you perform were sapping away your power, using the residual psychic energy of your victims to seal it away. The stronger the seer the victim, the bigger of a chunk would be sucked away. And as if to make the irony sweeter, the incantations you spoke were literally just you giving the ritual the instruction to take your energy and redirect it back here. But I didn't steal you away. No, only because that was impossible, but because I didn't need all of you. You see, you monsters are hilariously simple creatures. No matter how advanced your intellect, you are only driven by the instinct and desire to kill and induce fear in people. It's all rather trite." Adrian chuckled a bit. "Yes, since I was small, I've watched your kind kill and break people's minds, and I followed in your footsteps. Mostly out of pure boredom, mind you. It was fun for a while, but I think I'm ready to move on to bigger things now. Evolve a little, you know?" The Harbinger knew now. It had never felt it before, but it knew what this feeling must have been. It was not rage, or amusement, or bloodlust. It was fear. Fear. Fear of Adrian Bishop. I find that power such as this is quite wasted on the likes of you. For centuries, mind you, you've been using it to simply go about killing people in the most dreadful ways possible. Your psychology won't permit you to have higher ambition, but mine does." Adrian stood up from his chair, moving to the edge of the circle. From his pocket, he pulled out a pistol, aiming it at the Harbinger with that smug, knowing grin on his face. "Believe me, your power is in better hands now, superior hands. When I ascend to the higher plane, no one will be safe." He cocked the pistol. "I don't care about who's interesting or unique. I don't just look at the things on an individualistic level like you do. No, my goal is the entire world. I don't just want one person begging for mercy. I want the entire human race to be wishing it had never existed." His smile grew from ear to ear, bordering on deranged. "And so, thanks to you, I can take the first step towards that goal. But alas, as much as I may brag, I do see the value in sticking to one's roots." By now the Harbinger was sitting in a ball on the ground, as if it would make the monster go away. Adrian extended his leg and put his foot on the creature's head, triumphantly. "I think I will always have a particular fondness for the freaks like you, Harbinger." He shot the pistol.